Good evening, everyone. We're going to wait just a little bit for everybody to fill into the Zoom room. Welcome. Good evening and welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait a few more moments as people fill in. We have a great showing tonight. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Stephen Shad, and I'm the Executive Director of Communications at the Gerald D. Hines College of Architecture and Design at the University of Houston. I'm happy to welcome you tonight to our Sally Walsh Roundtable with Alan Bruton, the Director of Interior Architecture at our college, as well as Stephen Fox and Lois Farfel Stark. If you're unfamiliar with our programming for this year, check out our website at uh.edu/architecture/lecture series. We're very excited to welcome our panelists this evening, as well as several other guests. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Alan.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see that? Yeah.
Good.
Okay. So thank you, Stephen, for the general introduction. I do want everyone to be cognizant tonight that this is a kickoff event for an endowment we're establishing in the college in Sally Walsh's name, a Sally Walsh Endowed Professorship. There are giving opportunities on our website, and you'll notice that there's a QR code in the bottom of the screen. If you have your phone handy, you can just take a picture of it, and it'll take you right to that webpage. I'll show that again later in the event. So I want to welcome our two very special panelists this evening, Stephen Fox and Lois Farfel Stark. As Stephen mentioned, my name's Alan Bruton. I'm associate professor at University of Houston, and I direct the interior architecture program. Stephen Fox is an architectural historian and lecturer at Rice School of Architecture, and also lecturer at Gerald D. Hines College of Architecture here at the University of Houston. He's a fellow at the Anchorage Foundation of Texas. In his scholarship, he examines the ways that architecture engages such social constructs of class identity, cultural distinction, and regional differentiation. Fox is the author of the AIA Houston Architectural Guide, The Country Houses of John F. Staub, and is contributor to the Society of Architectural Historians, The Buildings of Texas, Central, South, Gulf Coast. Most recently, he has contributed the chapter on Howard Barnstone's practice to Making Houston Modern, Howard Barnstone's Life and Architecture, edited by Barry Scardino Bradley and Michelangelo Sabatino. In the lower left hand of your screen, you'll see Lois Farfel Stark, Emmy Award-winning producer, documentary filmmaker, and author. Lois Farfel Stark has produced and written works on architecture, medical research, globalization, artists, and social issues. Stark is the recipient of an Emmy, 2 Cine Gold Awards from the International Film Festival of the Americas, and the American Bar Association Silver Gavel Award. Most recently, Stark's book, The Telling Image, Shapes of Changing Times, has won the Indie Book Award. So we're very happy to have these special guests with us tonight. In the audience, what we're calling our first row, if we were in our auditorium at the college today, we have a number of special guests who knew and worked with Sally Walsh and have a special relationship to her memory. So who is Sally Walsh? Why are we here tonight? Sally Sherwin Walsh arrived in Houston in 1955 and immediately began her engagement with the transformation of the growing city through its interior environment. Good design for everyone was Walsh's motto. And during her 4 decades of influential practice, Walsh collaborated with other design and cultural leaders who were likewise proponents of modern design as a marker and means of an expansive, progressive culture. This evening's event brings together key people who knew and worked with Walsh. This is Sally's stationery. Born in 1926 in Arizona, Sally was raised in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, with her mother and sister Mary, who is hopefully joining us this evening, and moved to Chicago as a young woman who worked, she says, 12 jobs in as many weeks until she landed the Chicago Knoll showroom. And she knew of Knoll through her mother's and father's influence on having culture around the house. So Hans took an immediate liking to Sally's hat and told her promptly that Knoll women don't wear hats, but that she seemed perfectly blank and would make a wonderful employee. So over the next 6 years, Sally worked with Knoll and had what would basically be considered to be a apprenticeship under Florence Knoll, who was an architect and also the founder of the Knoll Planning Unit, and really instilled in Sally, who was everything in the Chicago Knoll room. She says she did everything from change the lights to take the dog on a walk. Florence and Hans instilled in Sally a wonderful architectural sense of the modern interior. This photograph we see to her left is her finery, but this next photograph is much more indicative of the kind of presence that Sally had at the time. She was on one of these walks around the block with Hans's dog, taking the dog for a walk, and was noticed by a cigarette ad man who offered her to be in a cigarette advertisement for Viceroy cigarettes. So you see Sally pasted to the left in the foreground of the Knoll Chicago showroom. Of her contemporaries to the right of the screen, you see 3 other models of what it was like to be a young woman in the 50s, right? Flirting with college football boys, gossiping while shopping, and trying to find the husband to the lower left. But she was represented as the modern, successful, professional, design-oriented, future-oriented woman. Sally, for various reasons, was sent to Houston in the 1950s to scope out Houston as a possible place for a Knoll showroom. And so Houston at this time, post-war, is about 500,000 people in population. It's already become an energy center, leaving behind aspects of its commodity culture in rice and sugar and exportation of cotton and exportation of southern yellow pine. But she is hired to open a Houston showroom. Hans Knoll dies in a tragic car accident around this time, and Sally decides to stay in Houston, where her husband Bill was stationed at Ellington Field. She works for Sunnyland Furniture for a couple of years, and then she meets, I can't get rid of this thing on my screen, excuse me. Let me see, there we can. Okay, she finds friendship in Houston's furnishings and design culture, especially through her partnership that develops business-wise with Jack Evans. They form a company called Evans Walsh, which is a purveyor of modern design in modern settings to both the residential market and the commercial market. This is about this time. Sally already is published in magazine, 1957. This is forecasting design trends for 1958. You see in the lower right-hand corner a image of the Farfel house, which Sally designed the interior. Now, what's interesting is this magazine is a magazine that Sally hung on to. This issue of it is her copy. She hung on to it for her entire life. And she seemed to use it as a kind of guide for understanding Texas culture. In the magazine, we say that the entire magazine is geared around the topic of Texas as the forefront of modern progressive American thought at the time, the modern city in the New South as opposed to the rusting North. So there are articles in here on art collection and art conservation and art curation in Texas, on authors who are writing in Texas and about Texas, asking the question, what makes Texas different? Going down to the nitty gritty, like what are trends for the modern hostesses on Texas tables? You'll notice in the lower right of this image that there is a high Buddha that's part of a setting for what's called a Moroccan-inspired low dining setting. But you'll see to the right, this Buddha is going to come back around in Sally's life in this story shortly. But obviously, what's important about this story is the Farfel house. So what we have is beautiful images of the interior of the Farfel house that Sally so sensitively designed with, as they say in the article, texture is the new topic. So with these textural and color associations and usages that wouldn't have been typical for Knoll at the time, but in a kind of whimsicality that Sally brings to her work, including even objects of craft that you see, for instance, or family heirlooms that you see, for instance, in the couch to the lower left. Of particular importance is even the sort of use of color that Sally brings to the project, like the dusty blue that's in the parents' bedroom and the incredible blue ceiling in the girls' bedroom that is delineated by this luminous golden line. This is a story that will come back into this evening's conversation. After a few years with Jack Evans, the Evans Walsh is rotated to be Evans Monocle, right? So Sally decides to start work at a more commercial scale, a more commercial level, with Wilson's office stationery that was a major purveyor of design furniture at the time. Here's where the Buddha comes back into it. You see a Buddha in Sally's house. So the Sally's house, she ended up buying the Fred Winchell studio house. And years later, after she became successful, she successfully bidded for one of these Buddhas that she still had in her collection throughout her life. Sally worked at Wilson's for many years, and to the time that she even moved on to Cy Morris, when she was involved in the design of the new Wilson's showroom that's on the highway, the Southwest Freeway that was just being built at the time. This Wilson showroom is designed as a storefront for the highway that was being elevated in front of it. So you'll see in this entire display plan where there are different eras of furniture displayed around the plan separately, where people could mix and match and choose their own combinations. Forefront, often in the display window along the highway that would be lit brightly at night, would be Knoll design furnishings. So you see that white strip that was lit at night in the highway that was about to be raised. During her time at Wilson, she was also invited to design a Rowdown exhibit at Museum of Modern Art in Houston. This was an exhibit that had different designers in different shows in different cities around the country. For Sally's in Houston, she controversially designed the show so that the heaviness of the Rodin sculptures were elevated on plexiglass vitrines, and it dispersed amongst plants as if they were in a garden within the museum. The Cantor Foundation, who sponsored the entire exhibition, wrote a letter to Sally thanking her for this work, which they thought was the best Rodin exhibition in the entire series. And they gifted her even an original Rodin hand sculpture in order to commend her for her work. Also, typical of the projects that she was doing at this time, she's working with various architects in town, arranging the interior environments in their projects. And this project for Goodwin, Dannenbaum, Littman, Wingfield, a PR agency, Anna Wingfield might be in the office, in the studio audience tonight. This project for Goodwin, Dannenbaum, Littman, Wingfield shows, again, sort of Sally's sort of eclectic mix of the historical artifact, as well as, for instance, at this period, this is 1968, these super graphics that are very influenced by, for instance, Quentin Fiore's graphics for Marshall McLuhan's Medium is the Massage. He's at this time designing this fabulous student center for the University of Houston, which has been redesigned since then, but it's designed as if it's a high-end corporate retreat with more Knoll furniture than you can shake a stick at. And in order to provide a sort of homey and professional environment for students who are attending this growing university. After Wilton, Sally moves on to S.I. Morris Associates, which later became Morris Aubrey, and of course, many other permutations of this legacy Houston architecture firm. Sally was hired, you see her here on the left, to start up their interior planning unit, which she called the Morris Planning Unit, sort of as a homage to and using the methods of the Knoll Planning Unit. She was the first principal in such a firm in Houston and set a tone amongst this august group of architects, Alvin Newton, Harold Hubbard, George Spence, Magruder Wingfield, Frederick Jones, Nolan Wilson, John Bertini, William Kendall, Robert Roy, Eugene Aubrey, who unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight. He sends his regards. He's well. J. Al Weatherfield, William Hoyer, and James Heaton, William Kendall amongst them. Sally was holding her own at the professional front in this firm that was competing against SOM and Gensler on a national and international level. The kinds of projects she was doing during her tenure there were, for instance, the ever popular Knoll Houston design showroom. So this is evidence of Sally's, these sales in her project are evidence of a kind of a local craft culture interest of hers. So she had a sale guy in Galveston, the Cameron Sale Works, who worked with her on a number of projects you'll see on such kind of fabric, tectonic textile constructions for these projects. So this is the Knoll showroom. This is the Stendig showroom in Dallas. So you can see there's a reflective ceiling. There's also a kind of a tensile fabric constructed ceiling that would sort of attenuate acoustics and provide visual interest. She did large-scale public projects because Sally was interested in the public interior. So for instance, this is for Houston Public Library, furnished in a way. So for instance, the Barcelona chairs that are in the lobby, apocryphally, what people say is that the library board said we can't have such expensive furniture in the lobby because what if the winos are going to sleep on it? And Sally says apparently that If a wino were to get a book and take a nap in her chair, she'd have considered her job well done. She went on to do the corporate headquarters for Braniff International Airlines in Dallas at the DFW airport, where again, she shows this inventive, playful craft interest, local material interest in this arrangement of sales. Because so as this article came out around that time, Sally would say, keep the houses, I'll take the big projects. But she was also interested in small details in these big projects. So this evidences her extreme interest in furniture, which was ongoing throughout the 70s, work that she was doing together with her local sort of fabrication collaborator, the architect Raymond Brockstein from Brockstein Incorporated, who they were great friends and collaborators. So Brockstein Inc. would do these prototypes for these furnishing lines, and they were planning, if evidence, to do something major with that. The most famous of these furniture designs that was produced was the desk for Braniff, called the Braniff desk, obviously. So these are the sort of drawings for the production of that. This is made by Brockstein. So, and it's in the collection of the Museum of Fine Art Houston and other collections. There are a number of them that are still amongst former executives at Braniff. And so this would, for instance, be around the time leading up to one of Sally's later projects, which was the interior for the Brockstein's house, right? Where you see, this is a photograph that if you look at a recent article from which is a photograph many years after this one. Nothing in this arrangement of furnishings and object decor, which Sally selected in place, has been moved in all these years. So what was this fascination Sally had with furniture design and home furnishings design? Where was it leading? So we see that Sally was, and Raymond Brockstein were looking to start up a furniture company called Sherwin Limited. And they had hired Herbert Matter, the graphic designer who had done the logos and most of the graphics, especially early on for Knoll. And here is a letter from Herbert saying, I hope that brand of project will be delayed so that we can get started on this project, right? So it was a serious project. The financial information had been gathered, prototypes were being planned, distribution networks were being planned. And it was happening to the level that, so for instance, real design investigation was going on with how to make an innovative series of furniture. So this is a Citroen, of course. And earlier, Sally and Eugene Aubrey had, because Eugene Aubrey had a Citroen, and they decided that the Citroen chair was the most comfortable chair in the world. And so they decided what makes the Citroen chair work. So here's a photograph of Don Palmer, Sally's good colleague and friend from Flame Morris, and Sally sort of taking the Citroen chair apart, trying to understand its geometry and what made it such a great chair. Sally was turning these ideas, interpreting them into sectional seating and auditorium seating that would have been foundational to the line along with the Braniff table and the other Braniff furnishings, would have been foundational to the line of Sherwin Limited, a line that would have had other kinds of furnishings by Sally's hand, and even textile designs by Sally, and even, frankly, down to the smallest of details, again, evidence of her interest in craft, these charming Christmas ornaments that would have been pressed in metal and enamel. So these are all documents that are emerging from the files from Brockstein's Inc. and from the Museum of Fine Arts Houston and from the Woodson Center at Rice University, as well as archives at Hewitt Solars, who's the firm that ended up inheriting the Morris firm. And also the family of Sally Walsh, who's donated hundreds of documents that were from Sally's personal files, and that will also be put into the MFA archiving system. Here's a typical beautiful photo of Sally. These are photos of her towards the end of her life by by Robert Burnett, her nephew. And here's a charming collage by her sister. They were basically twin sisters, a year apart. So Mary Burnett, the artist, who's still with us today. And this would be the kind of rapport that they had back and forth between Sioux Falls and Houston on a continuing basis. I'd like to announce that we've discovered through this research new materials at the Museum of Fine Arts archive. For instance, this 2-hour lecture by Sally that she gave in 1988, where she talks at length about her biography. She doesn't even show a slide until 45 minutes into it. But it's a fascinating document, and we're having it transcribed, and it will become part of the document that will then become a book and then an exhibition about Sally's work and her importance to design in general and design in Houston. So again, this is work that is part of this overall effort that will help us also raise money to fund the Sally Walsh Endowed Professorship here at the University of Houston. We already have 2 major donors who've given to this effort. James Thomas, who's with us tonight, and Barbara Emilio, who's with us tonight, have both donated $6,000 towards the advancement of this effort. So I just would like to leave you with that. Before I introduce Stephen Fox, we'll invite him to come up to the podium, so to speak.
Thanks to Alan Bruton and the Interior Architecture Program at the Gerald D. Hines College of Architecture and Design for organizing this tribute to Sally Walsh. Professor Bruton asked me to talk about Sally Walsh in the context of the development of modern architecture in Houston. As we've learned, Sally Sherwin came to Houston from Chicago in 1955 with her new husband, Bill Walsh, charged by Hans Knoll with scouting out potential markets in Texas for his furniture manufacturing firm, Knoll Associates, and the Knoll Planning Unit, Knoll's interior design component, headed by Hans Knoll's wife, Florence Schuss Knoll. By the mid-1950s, Houston's modern architecture and art scene were flourishing. Fred McKee and Carl Kamrath, Houston's first modern architects, had established their practice in 1937. Although they were both Texans, they, like Sally Walsh, came to Houston from Chicago. Donald Barthelme had followed McKee and Kamrath to become Houston's second modern architect, reorienting his practice from eclectic to modern with the house he designed for his family in West Oaks in 1940. After the Second World War, McKee and Kamrath and Donald Barthelme attracted recognition nationally because their buildings were published in the American Architectural Press. They were joined by a new generation of Houston modern architects, the partners Hugo V. Newhouse and C. Herbert Cowell, Howard Barnstone and Preston M. Bolton, George F. Pierce and Abel B. Pierce, Albert S. Goldman and Walter T. Rolfe, J. Victor Newhouse III and Harwood Taylor, and Wiley Vale and Milton Foy Martin, and such post-war architecture school graduates as Anderson Todd, Burdett Keeland, John S. Chase, Kenneth Benson, and Eugene Aubrey. Architects who began their practices before the war, Lloyd Morgan and Jones and Wilson Morris Crane and Anderson, went modern with the encouragement of young design associates, as Ben Kausch shows in his book on the architect Arthur Jones. What stands out about these practices, as well as those of Bailey Swinson, Philip Willard, Lucian Hood, and Lars Bang, is the opportunities that came their way to design and build. And these opportunities were not limited to Houston architects. Philip Johnson and Edward D. Stone of New York, the New York office of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe of Chicago, Bruce Goff, then based in Oklahoma, and the Texan architects O'Neill Ford and Richard S. Colley were responsible for designing significant buildings in Houston during the 1950s. Houston clients were ready to embrace the new. Sally Walsh found herself at the right place at the right time, and it was with confidence, design vision, and vivid imagination that she embraced these opportunities. Judy Kugel, in her master's thesis on Sally Walsh, underscores the point that Sally Walsh was not only a design innovator, she was also a professional innovator. Sally Walsh was instrumental in shaping the modern profession of interior design in Houston. Robert D. Harrell of Los Angeles was the first interior design professional I'm aware of to be active in Houston. Harrell was producing residential work for Houston clients by the late 1920s. His most famous commission was to design the interiors of the Shamrock Hotel, which opened in 1949. During the 1930s, Inez Picor McHale and the partners Virginia West and Eugene Harris were among Houston's first residential interior decorators. The Englishman T.H. Robsjohn Gibbings designed the interiors, including much of the furniture, for Opal Woodley and J.R. Parton's modern house in River Oaks of 1940 by architect Claude Houghton. And the New York City-based Macmillan Incorporated operated a Houston studio and art gallery from 1940 to 1942. The New York industrial designers Raymond Loewy and William T. Snaith were responsible for the interiors of Foley's department store of 1947, while just across Main Street, Brockstein's, the cabinet-making firm begun by Raymond Brockstein's father, I.S. Brockstein, in 1935, designed the interiors of Sakowitz Brothers store of 1951. By the mid-1950s, the Knoll Planning Unit was producing both corporate and residential interiors for Houston clients. Sally Walsh was not unusual in coming to interior design without academic credentials. Charles Janes, who designed the interiors of Philip Johnson's Menil House, was a couturier. Herbert Wells, Sally Walsh's near contemporary, began his Houston career not as an interior designer, but as a milliner. In the cases of both Sally Walsh and Herbert Wells, their lack of an academic education in design perhaps enabled each to craft a style of operation as well as a style of modern design that persistently eluded conventionality. Sally Walsh's professional trajectory, from Knoll Associates to Sunnyland Furniture, to Evans Walsh, to Wilson Stationers, to S.I. Morris Associates, tracks the evolution of corporate and institutional interior design in Houston, from equipment sales in the 1950s to, as Alan Bruton observes, a form of architectural practice focusing on how people live and work in buildings. Even in photographs, you can see what makes Sally Walsh's work so captivating. She engages occupants emotionally through the precision and economy of her designs, the beguiling intimacy of her details, and the exhilaration sparked by her inventiveness. For instance, in Barnstone and Aubrey's New York offices for Le Perc de Neuflis, Sally Walsh installed brightly painted drill bits as standing sculptural totems to punctuate the clerical workspace. Howard Barnstone's word for the sensation such surprise interventions produced was magic. the affective power that charges space. What Sally Walsh found in Houston modernism of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s was opportunity. Clients confident in her judgment and skill, and what seems from today's perspective to have been an astonishing lack of client anxiety about doing something that hadn't been tried before. To this cultural disposition, Sally Walsh brought a sensibility animated by ingenuity, imagination, and wit. As might be expected from a woman born in the town of inspiration, her work possessed the power to move you with its insight, genius, and joy.
And now I'd like to invite Lois Farfel Stark to share.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Stephen, and hello, everyone. My comments will mention three areas: the culture in 1955 when Sally came to Houston, and then how she personified an exact blend of both elegance and authority. And third and final thing, I'll share two anecdotes which could show that by her choices, her uncommon choices, she could change your life forever. So the first is the culture in the 1950s. When she came to Houston, it was a time when conformity was king. It was the stamp of the 50s, and the most popular book at the time was The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, about how to be an exact imitation of a mold. So it was a time also when women's roles were confined to being a teacher or a secretary, and more or less your choices ended there. Style then meant a poodle skirt, which was a wide felt skirt which had a poodle appliqued upon it. And it was a time when conservative values were just coming off their heyday in the McCarthy hearings. So this nonconformity in that period was associated with fear. It wasn't until the 1960s when individuality and freedom became associated with each other. So it just adds to how magical a trick it was for Sally to change this entrenched view of a norm and introduce a new way of living, a new way of seeing, a new way of thinking. She could inspire downtown leaders to literally change their environment, their personal office and corporate environment. And she was leading them into a world they had never experienced. She had to convince the CEOs and the managing partners to relinquish their curved, dark wood desks and sit behind desks with lean lines and light woods, to go from stuffed sitting chairs to armless Mies van der Rohe Barcelona sling chairs. But along came Sally, and as she put these leaders in a new forward way of thinking, she was also inviting them to expand their minds, to be open to ideas in all areas of life. And that leads me to my second point, how she did this. She would not only introduce design, but gave this new way of living because she herself was an original blend of both elegance and authority. In her personal style and in her professional work, she personified this new way of being, this consummate blend, not into an average, but into a unique self. In one of my favorite pictures of Sally, she's leaning on a windowsill and wearing trousers with long flowing legs, looking like Katharine Hepburn, a perfect mix of stately, stylish, strong. And I think about her unique way through the metaphor of a carpenter's plumb line. A plumb line is a cord with a weight at one end that tells you if you are straight. And like a plumb line, Sally knew her mind. She was exact even, straightforward, like the clean lines she designed. Seamlessly, she blended grace and ingenuity, and she could be friends with men and women equally. She could make business decisions and artistic decisions without separating them. She met each person eye to eye. When she would have dinner at our home, she related to everyone in our multi-generational family, my grandfather and my aunt, my mother and my father, my sister and me. And my father and Sally were both visionaries. Even in the 1960s, they might be discussing how humans will be living on Mars, or when will we have Dick Tracy watches of our own to use. But for both of them, living in the modern style meant a fascination with the future. My mother agreed to go into modern, but she had one request, and that was to make the home feel warm. And Sally listened. Instead of the terrazzo floors that were typical in modern homes of that time, she designed wood floors with herringbone patterns. And she gave us sofas with wood legs, not a lot of what is now associated with modern design, which would be the glass and metal, but things that had texture and warmth with them. In the kitchen and breakfast room area, she startled with a red floor. And this was made of red rubberized tiles, large tiles, and it abutted to a yellow wall. And red and yellow were very uncommon choices that were not often seen together, but it was as if she was saying, start the day with bright and warm. And the third thing I will mention in closing are two anecdotes that may give you a kind of taste of her essence. One is about a letter and the other is about a blue ceiling, just to show you how she could change your world with one of her uncommon choices. Recently, I found a thank you note from Sally to my parents for just an ordinary holiday gift. And it begins, quote, I am sitting by the fire writing this note. So think about just that line. I am sitting by the fire writing this note. There was an I to you perspective that was at once an immediate direct relationship, but it also said something more about her visual eye, seeing herself sitting there, writing the note, placed by the fire. She had an innate sense of scene, and her sense of self was inseparable from her environment, even in an ordinary note.
I'm sorry, Lois. It looks like we may have lost your audio there. Let's see. There we go. You should be ready to go, Lois.
Okay, where did I lose the sound? Do you have a clue when I lost the sound?
It was a paragraph ago.
Did I finish the letter part?
You had just finished the letter and her sense and sensibility of scene making and
That her sense of self was inseparable from her environment. And then since this symposium centers on the question of what matters and how our environment can affect it, I'll offer one last anecdote. I was 12 years old when she designed my parents' modern home, and my sister and I shared a bedroom. The walls were white as expected in a modern home, but in that bedroom, unexpectedly, Sally had the ceiling painted a deep blue. My childhood self would look up at that blue and imagine a limitless sky. I tried to imagine how far I could see. Even then, I had an inkling that the blue above me was a gift from Sally, a wink from her, an encouragement to wonder, a way she was telling me, I put this blue here for you. Now let your mind fly. She taught us all how to let our minds fly. She knew what mattered. She understood her time, and she changed her time.
Thank you so much, Lois. Those are such personal, insightful remarks, and thank you, Stephen, for the amazing contextualization of the Houston she entered design-wise and her contribution to it, her being affected by it and affecting it, right, inside Houston and outside. I think maybe a good place to open up the conversation to our audience and amongst ourselves would be to read a question that came in earlier from Maria Barlow. And I think, Lois, you've spoken to this question somewhat, but I know that there are others in the audience who can speak to it as well. So Maria Barlow was Cy Morris's daughter. And so she says, Sally was a friend and a great inspiration for me when I was in my 20s, not only as a beacon of taste, but also in her outspoken sureness of her own opinion and the validity of a forthright expression of that opinion. She was a powerhouse, unafraid of expressing her personality, yet she was not a feminist. She seemed to me to have been born with the convictions that the feminists were actually actively fighting to claim. My father adored her and appreciated her strength. So the question then would be, to what do you attribute, to what can anyone here contribute to her remarkable self-assurance and the power and poise that she maintained within the largely male world of corporate America? Where did her strength come from?
Lois?
It was a gift from God. You know, it just seems to be something so deeply rooted and so natural that it wasn't acquired. It was gifted from birth. And I suspect from your remarks of their early home and she and her sister having that allowance to have your own mind, to speak your own mind, to create new thoughts, were all permitted. And so with having perhaps stage one of life, allowing development of that self-assurance and that self-creativity that she never lost and continued to develop.
For that, I would say that Sally often, in remarks that she made about her upbringing, they were treated as adults at the table, and they were meant to respond like adults at the table and contribute like adults at the table. So that she was an old soul, like you say, born that way, but she was an old soul. And you know, her father's a scientist, and her mother and a philosopher, and they had philosophical arguments at the in their childhood setting. Unfortunately, her father died at 10, and then she had a rambunctious life also as a young woman in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where she did all kinds of things. And she worked in the Smithfield plant on the hot dog line. By God, you know, she was an independent. I mean, she was fearless. So, James, I know that first of all, I wanted to bring James Thomas up if James can be shared, because James is one of the primary instigators on this entire bringing of Sally Walsh back into our present consciousnesses. We started this conversation about a year ago on what to do with her memory. James, are you in the audience? Can you share? I know that Sally Walsh had a big effect on your professional life and development, but you were at CRSS and she brought you into Cy Morris's planning unit and the Morris planning unit. And you've shared many stories about her contributions to people's careers and lives and well-being, that she was a very, very thoughtful and supportive mentor to many people.
James, if you'd like to share, you can just
There
unmute
he
your
is. Just press unmute. Can we force unmute him? Can we unmute him?
Unfortunately, no, I've asked him to unmute, but
There are all these buttons to work with, you know.
is there somebody else you want to call on at this time, Alan?
Well, I wonder, Marilyn Archer and I had a wonderful visit last week about this whole initiative and Sally. And I wonder if she would like to speak to being a professional peer, in essence, as a younger member of the design community, and having Sally as a strong member of that community. Marilyn, would you like to share?
Marilyn, if you'd like to share, you can just unmute your mic or start your video.
Oh, Zoom is being mutable.
Well, Alan, do you know, are there any Sally Walsh interiors that are still intact?
Well, there's the Brock. So of the commercial ones, really no, only bits and pieces. Of the, and this would lead to inviting someone else to speak as well. So Marilyn's on, so Marilyn, hold that thought for a second. We'll come right back to you.
Okay.
So for instance, Sally didn't do many houses, right? Oh, James, there you are. Hold your thought for I'll use my thought. So Sally didn't do that many domestic interiors, right? There are bits and pieces of what was the Farfel house still intact. And then there's the Brockstein residence, of course, the interior to that's intact. And it's also true that there's another interior of Sally's intact in Houston that went through two different phases of her design work. And with that, I'd probably like to ask Gail Adler to participate an observance or a memory. Lois's sister, Gail. Hello, Gail.
Good. Well, it's nice that you asked me, because actually we are in the room at this moment that Sally designed. So you can see what this was back in 1980 that she designed.
Oh, your camera's off.
Oh, so you can't see. Okay. Well, Jean Aubrey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Well, Jean Aubrey designed this addition to our house, and Sally, of course, she did everything for us as a favor, basically, because she didn't really like doing residential. But she did our New York apartment when we first got married. She did our home, this home, which we're in. And then the addition, which we're in, that I'm in now. I thought you could see it. So that's why I put all the lights on. But there is another example I would like to tell you about her unique vision. And it was created about 50 years ago. We moved in this house in 48 years ago. But in the entry to our house is a curved staircase. She took the design and color pattern from a Morris Louis painting to create a carpet that she had Vashofsky make. And now I must tell you, every day and night, I enjoy walking on my beautiful Morris Louis carpet and just dream that of how brilliant Sally was. But I can also say that maybe if we ever finish COVID, you all are more than welcome to come and see, because every part of our house is something that we never had anybody but Sally create.
Mhm. I've been lucky to see it, and I can vouch for that. And I hope that we can come and we can actually take a seat. So,
Perfect, good.
excellent. James is back. Would you
Well,
like-
I'm reminded of an interview I sat in on. Sally was interviewing a young man to come to work for us, and he was very good. He was skilled at illustration, and he also gave us a written list of things that he did not do. And Sally looked at the list and didn't say anything, but she reached for a tissue and wiped out the ashtray in front of this young man and explained that her philosophy was, if something needed to be done, you do it. Well, he was hired, but he lasted about 6 weeks and never to be heard from again. One of the things that I would like to remember Sally for was that, I mean, she was a great designer. She was a great communicator, but she was also a matchmaker. And she, you would never hear her talk about this, but the number of people that she met in the course of her career who she thought had some potential, and she very often she would counsel them on their hair, what to wear during a business meeting. And the one that I'll never forget, we used to go to a lunch place called Tuttle House. And we were there a couple of times a week for, a long time. It was right around the corner from the office. Well, the waitress was a terrific young woman, very well met. And so, we talked. Well, we walked in one noon and she was in the middle of tears. And Sally, wanted immediately to know what the problem was. Well, she had just been fired. There was a tension between her and the boss. And Sally said, well, what would you like to do? And the young woman said she would like to, she liked food service, but she would like to be a hostess. Well, that evening, she was a hostess in a restaurant that Sally was designing. Just like that. Sally was, she was wonderful in seeing people with potential and then helping them. I just wanted to make sure that that facet of her was explained. And Mrs. Stark, I thought your comments on Sally as a person were just wonderful. Thank
I
you.
appreciate that, but there's no way to capture that mood.
So again, James, thank you for your support and all of your knowledge on this.
Well, she was an unusual person, and there was none like, and I'm sure that there are none in the future, but she was a wonderful person, and
I'm going to
miss
go
her.
to Marilyn. Our Archer is there, ready to unmute and say hello, I think.
I am.
Hello.
Hi. And I am sitting here with some other very interested people in hearing this roundtable about Sally. I'm with Margot Grant Walsh and Bud Luther, who you probably know very well are luminaries in interior design, and we're all having such a great time learning more about everyone's experiences with Sally. The only personal experience I had, I think I told Alan, was having my hair cut next to Sally on one occasion. And I could not help but overhear the precise direction she was giving her stylist. And she wanted her hair cut the exact same way, regardless. It was going to be straight. It was going to be just above the shoulder. It was just, and he says, "Oh, well, couldn't we try something else?" And she goes, "No, this is what I like." And I thought, I admire this woman. She can wear the same hairstyle forever, and it is classic. It is exactly her.
Well, it's fantastic that you could have Mrs. Grant Walsh and Mr. Luther here join this evening. I wonder if there are any particular memories there to express.
I'm Margot Grant, and then Margot Grant Walsh. Had I known there was another Walsh in Houston, I probably wouldn't have come. No, seriously.
Yeah.
I worked for SOM. I started my career there. And the first major job I did was Tentacle, or then TGT. I can't figure out why wasn't Sally tapped into a corporate headquarters like TGT, because I did it with SOM and they loved Knoll furniture. They knew they always wanted to have that look. That was the kind of the SOM New York that came out of Chicago and New York. But I had this crazy Russian that had come to San Francisco, and it was his first job after leaving SOM New York to be on his own and work with the New York office, which was very different than Chicago and San Francisco. And it's like she would have really hit it off with the SOM partners, because they were all very insecure about interiors. They would go immediately to the Knoll catalog and say, "Can't you do this?" And actually, SOM emulated a lot of the Knoll planning unit designs. When I went to New York to work on a project from San Francisco, and they had a book, like a catalog of drawings. And every drawing was an SOM drawing, and everything was stainless steel, marble, expensive. But you picked from this book, whether it was a conference table or a coffee table or an end table, there was a design for everything. Right down, you could do it in bronze, brass, polished stainless. I mean, and I was amazed when I came out from San Francisco and spent that time there. But that was the SOM look, which I think since they started in Chicago, I think they really were very much inspired by Hansel. Anyway, I didn't meet Sally right away, but Preston Moore introduced us. And of course I wasn't a Walsh. And I was sort of in awe of her because she was a very elegant, stately, commanding. She held a space. And she was casual, but you knew that she was important. And that's what I remember about meeting Sally. And then I got so busy, wrapped up in, I just joined Gensler. That was it. I left Skidmore to join Gensler to work on Pennzoil. And so I was just getting acquainted with Houston again, and then having to be responsible for making the Houston office survive. So I didn't have a lot of social life, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, no, I was working all the time. And I was fortunate that I worked blood.
Then you went to New York to open the New York Gensler office.
Yeah, I went to New York, I opened that, and I opened London, and I'd opened Washington and Boston, yeah.
A lot of open.
Yeah. No, it was, Gensler had been a West Coast firm, and Pennzoil, you all heard have you heard the story about how Art Gensler got Pennzoil? Because it was sort of it overwhelmed the market in Houston, because there were a lot of good architects in Houston. Art started by doing tenant development and planning. Tenant planning with real estate people being Cushman Wakefield. And so whenever they published a brochure, at the bottom of the brochure, whether it was an oil company or a corporate or a bank, space planning and tenant development, Arthur M. Gensler. So none of you would remember Leroy Paris, but he ran the Pennzoil project. And he was sitting there in his office one day, and he's going through all these brochures. He keeps saying Art Gensler. So he calls Art Gensler and says, "Hey, I'm Leroy Paris. I represent a little yellow oil can in Houston. How come you haven't called on me?" And Art says, "Oh, I don't know, but I'll come if you want." I mean, that was the Art Gensler. So he said, "Well, I think I want to hire you because you haven't tried to sell me." So Art trots out and he meets Roy and he walks home with the job. Now everybody, including Bud Luther, everybody wanted that job. And I kept thinking, Sally was such a force. Why didn't she get what I would say were two of the plum jobs, SOM Tenica or TGT and Philip Johnson Pennzoil? But that's what happens. You can't predict life. And I'm sorry I didn't know Sally. Who I did get to know was Natalie Dubois. Did you know Natalie when she was here? Skidmore sort of, did not do right by that woman. She was probably the most brilliant woman architect they ever had. So I had little snippets of female friends, but I was in the man's world, so to speak. And I love in Houston. It was great. I love the people. I still do. I come back. I'm here now. So thank you for letting me talk.
Oh, thank you for your contribution, your memories on this.
Well, they're all good. I come back to Houston about once a year, I think. And I've been retired for a long time, but I have a lot of friends here. Texans are very warm people. And the only thing I haven't in common with Sally is she's from South Dakota. I'm from North Dakota.
No, those are fighting words. Yeah.
Who knows anybody from either of the Dakotas?
He didn't know what winter was all about.
Oh, why do you suppose we laughed? Thank you for letting me talk.
Here's a question that one of you might have some insight to, and it's from Professor Tom Deal at the University of Houston, and so while he asks, like towards the end of Sally's career, who knows what her feelings? She's such an inveterate modernist, but who knows what her feelings were about postmodernism, right? She did the interior for Philip Johnson's University of Houston postmodern building, right? She extended showroom is certainly postmodern, but was she ever vocal about that movement?
I don't know, because I met her a few times, and mostly through, she was at Wilson's, and mostly through Preston, and Preston just adored her. He just thought she was the best ever. And we didn't have a big social life. I worked really hard, and I traveled a lot out of Houston for other markets. And in San Francisco, being a small town, that's how I met Art. All in the early 60s, when interior architecture was becoming a big deal and furniture dealers realized, hey, the furniture dealers in the showrooms would have parties, and they'd invite everybody to have cheap wine, bad cheese, but it was a social event, and they'd come and they'd mix and they'd say, what are you doing? And they were always seeing if there was anyone they wanted to hire. So it was a different social life, because San Francisco is a very small town. You can get around on the bus or walking. Houston, you got to have a car. So the kind of event, and you didn't have a central design area. San Francisco is centered around, what's it called, Jackson Square? Yeah, at Alexander Girard Building, Herman Miller. And they were all together, so the parties would migrate to this small area, and you kind of got to meet people, and you kind of who's doing what, and it was a very social. When I got to Houston, it was too broad and for me, because, and of course, being a woman, I couldn't just say I'm going to go to this party by myself. Well, you could do that in San Francisco. You could do something, but no, I loved Houston. I even thought of retiring here, but I have some mobility issues and I can't drive. So I rely on Marilyn and Bud, and they take me around in the hotel car, but it's still a great city. And I didn't think I would ever see weather like I saw last week.
None of us did.
No.
Didn't see it coming.
Well, we're coming up on 7:15. We promised that we'd be done by 7. I knew we wouldn't be done by 7. But is there anyone else who'd like to?
Is James Thomas still on?
Stephen, can you see?
Did he unmute? Is he there?
James?
You should be coming back to the screen.
In the meantime, I can share some trivia. Sally's favorite, oh, you can't even see it. Joy by Jean Patou is what Sally.
Oh, every woman liked Joy.
Yeah, that was Sally's fragrance. She said you were either a Chanel lady or you were a Joy lady.
Yeah.
Period.
Well, I'm very excited, Alan, that you have initiated this this entire idea. I can't think of anyone who embodies the early stages of interior architecture in the same way that Sally did, and she was an inspiration to me. And James, when I was a very right out of college designer, you and Margot did a symposium at the Houstonian, and I was making.
Turn on your microphone.
James's microphone is not on.
You need to unmute. So he, James and Margot, and there was one other person at the Houstonian besides the two of you, but you and Margot are the only ones I remember. And I sat there, I've told Margot this story that I was making zero money as a new designer. And somehow I scraped together enough to go to this symposium. And I sat there for a half a day, absolutely rapt, listening to the two of you. And James Thomas were hilarious, as you always are. It was.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Good.
Great.
Well, I want to announce that I was the guy that got Bud Luther into interior architecture.
He was really good, or he is really good.
Yeah, well, yes, of course. We're
James.
highly selective. The program that we're talking about was a one-time program of the AIA called Climbing the Ladder of Success. Terrible program, but I mean, terrible title, but it was a really good
It was really good.
program. And I have
Well,
I have sat through a lot of inspiring programs, and the portion of the program that Margot Grant gave was the best I had ever heard. And I wish she could go through her stuff and get the script, because I would love to get it to my students.
You know, James, I may still have it. I never.
Oh, well, it's,
anything
you got to get it.
He's got it.
You got to tell me
Yes.
the date and I'll find it.
We've got to have that.
Well, I feel very honored, but I've forgotten too much. That's what happens when you get into your 80s. You just forget a lot of things. Your mind is overwhelmed. Cluttered.
Leonard Kirkland has popped up on the screen he'd like to share.
Great.
Long history with Sally.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, I didn't get to work with Sally, but a classmate of mine from Auburn, she was an interior design student. I was architecture student, and another friend was in visual design, all in the same college at that time. And we had interior design and architecture had their first 2-year studios together. So I knew her very well. She came to Houston to work with Sally in about, I guess, about late 69 probably. And then I came to graduate school at Rice. And so we were fortunate enough, the artist friend Jeff and myself, along with Pam, who was working with Sally, she would invite us for Friday cocktails. And of course, you could have any cocktail you wanted as long as it was Dubonnet. And that was Sally. She somehow gave you all of the liberty you wanted, except told you what to do at the same time. But she had this quality about her that was both imperious. At the same time, she listened to everything you said and took it seriously. And I think through that, she instills confidence that she really expected you to do good things and you're going to do them. And so it was like the best start to a young career that one could have, is to have this person who just knew you were going to do these things, but then was very demanding at the same time. So I felt really fortunate to have gotten to know her in those Friday afternoon sessions. We would get it. It was at the Richmond house with the Buddha sculpture over there. So,
Lannis, you'll be tickled to know, and those of you who teach design will be glad to know that also lectures that Sally gave at RISD and around have emerged for notes to those lectures.
yeah.
We're looking for more people, former students of hers here and elsewhere, who might be able to share what she was like as a teacher. So
I think in my experience, and I think Pam, my friend who worked with her, she was almost an Annie Mayhem figure for us, really. she just swept you up. She had this incredible stage presence. She swept you up in it, yet she paid attention to you. So you were there. You weren't just ignored. But so I think Lois, some of that seemed to come through in what you were saying too. So it was wonderful to hear that. So I wasn't I wasn't special. I wasn't the only one, but I got my special time with her, and I'm really thankful for it.
I'll make a last call for contributions of stories while I put up this screen again that shows how to contact the college through our website or directly here through this splash page through the QR code to contribute to this, I think, what's going to be an impactful project to advance research in interior architecture at the University of Houston in her name, Sally Walsh's name.
Well, Alan, do you have any other person that would like to speak tonight?
I don't see anyone in the chat. Hold on a second. Let me stop sharing this because I can't see both at the same time, it looks. Yes, there was a question, a general question. There was a question about whether any of her family could attend, and yes, we did get messages from some of her family in South Dakota who attended her, which is nice. Anything else? I'm looking in the chat. And I say going once. This is how we have to end classes on Zoom, going once, going twice. Thank you all for being a part of this. Really, it's been a fantastic conversation. Lois, really thanks for your help.
Thanks, back to you.
Stephen, thanks for all your help on this, okay?
It was a pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Stephen Fox had to drop off at 7 o'clock, so we missed him after that, but it was wonderful to have him as well. Our recording of tonight's event is available on our Facebook page because we Facebook lived the event tonight, but you can find it also on our website later this week. It'll be at uh.edu/architecture/giving/Sally Walsh. If you just go up to the Giving tab at the top of our website, we have a page dedicated to the Sally Walsh Professorship and Student Scholarship Initiative. So with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.